As I said before, that I am a director and owner in South Ray Quay. I'm also a leaseholder in the Spinnakers, so I see it from both sides. And I'm also a landlady because I rent out those properties. So as well as being my day job, it's also my other job as well. So as I said, I see it on from both sides. For everyone here, how big an issue is antisocial behaviour, neighbours and behaviour generally?
Well, we've got students, we've got properties that have been sold to parents and they rent it out for their children that are at university, and for some reason they love Tuesday nights around 1 o'clock in the morning.
I agree.
Where we've experienced banging doors, noisy teenagers. Probably they've got one member of concierge on in the evening. I really understand that they're not confident enough to go and challenge it, but they have to. But we've had police on site unnecessarily. I believe if you know, everyone likes to have a bit of fun, but if you tell once, then respect that. But it doesn't. So
have your managing agents actually written to the owners of those apartments or flats?
They say the person who's dealing with it is not very strong as a manager person. And she needs to be more forthright.
What, in her letters or in
Well, she'll have a standardised letter, but it's the actually managing. So I could write a letter, anyone could do that, print it off, sign it, there you go. It's about managing it end to end and being proactive with managing situations and trying to prevent. That doesn't really happen.
I think
it's like, let's wait for it to happen and then...
Yeah, as well, our managing agent, I don't know whether this is typical, is very keen to stick as firmly as possible to exactly the letter of the lease, and is reticent to be even seen to be thinking about overstepping that. And our lease is surprisingly vague on what constitutes antisocial behaviour and all of that. And so basically we often get things that residents are complaining about, that the place looks untidy, that people are using the fronts of their apartments incorrectly and it's degrading the experience, and we sort of get a shrug of the shoulders from the managing agent because the lease doesn't say anything about that.
Well, the problem you've got is that your only contractual way of enforcing some of these issues is down to what's in the terms of the lease. So that can cause a real problem. And what I find is that most people, including myself, and when I've been the customer actually buying a property, is that you don't go through the lease in any great detail. And your solicitor might highlight some key terms for you. For example, in the Albert Dock, you can't sublet at all. That's a really important one that you need to know about. But you may just sort of brush through the other ones, and it's only when you actually have a problem that you come to look at the lease or ask your managing agent, what can you do about it? And you find that it's quite difficult for you to do anything at all. So certainly in respect of your current properties where you live, you need to know what the lease terms say, and certainly if you're buying anything else, it's really, really important that you look at the terms of the lease.
Sorry. I think the problem is, because the terminology is so legal, and if you're not from a legal background and you're not used to dealing with leases, because solicitors can go through basic stuff, but when you read it end to end yourself, you're like, haven't got a clue what,
at the end.
Yeah, and you haven't got a clue what half it means.
Yeah. Alan?
Well, just remember, you may or may not consider pets as antisocial.
Well, they can be if they're causing a nuisance, is the issue.
You know,
I mean, some will ban
pets.
pets.
Will specifically say that pets not allowed, but what happens, the precedent is set, and the managing agent not bothered, and the precedent set, and then others get it, and then there's a problem.
Well, there is, I mean...
And the same with other issues as well. It's, subletting you mentioned.
Well, I don't know, it depends what time.
And that's not allowed without the management company approval. But we know it happens. I mean,
we've got.
You don't know it.
We're dealing with subletting.
You don't know it happens.
Subletting's the next slide, so we'll keep those concerns.
I mean,
pets is part of this, really.
It is, and I mean, pets can be a problem, and certainly not so much with the private leaseholders or landlords I deal with, but certainly for housing associations, pets is a huge problem. Dog fouling, how you prove it's this particular dog that's fouling, if in fact they've all got permission, and that's I'm sort of laughing about it, but it is a serious problem because we have to actually definitely prove it's that particular dog owned by that particular person that's causing the fouling incident. And it is a real problem. I mean, it may be that you're able to look at other agencies to actually help, such as the police, such as environmental health, who have got their own enforcement action that they may be able to take, and that could be noisy neighbours, That could be dog issues or other pet issues, as well as looking at the terms of your lease. Now, if you've got a lease that says you're not allowed any pets without permission of the landlord, and they've got a pet there, it's causing nuisance, then it is possible, or it may be possible, to actually get an injunction to force them to get rid of the dog. But what you can't have is a situation where you've let everyone else have a dog and turned a blind eye, because that could be implied consent. And then, but you could still maybe argue that there is an issue in respect of nuisance, but you'd need to have actual evidence. You'd need to have neighbours to come forward to give statements, which most people are not prepared to do. So it is a real problem, I'm afraid. I mean, I personally had an issue with my house. I've got tenants in there at the moment, and there was a load of lads next door partying at all times of the night, and the landlord wasn't engaging. Our managing agent wrote to them. I went to the next stage of actually threatening to take injunction proceedings, because it's obviously an area that I'm comfortable in dealing with, and also serving what's called a Section 146 notice, also a threat of forfeiting the lease for the landlord to actually take it back. As it was, the owner then sold the property, so we didn't have to take that step. But I know it was very frustrating for my tenants, who actually were police officers, who felt that they couldn't do, it was difficult for them as to what steps they could take. And it was back to me as their landlady and owner of their property to try and take some steps. But I have the benefit of having the legal knowledge behind me. For someone who hasn't, it's quite difficult to actually manoeuvre your way around the legal process. And what quite often will happen is the managing agents will say, well, we can take certain steps, but then you need to go and see a solicitor. There may be that if you want the managing agent to take the steps for you, that there will be a clause in the lease to say you need to indemnify the managing agent respect of any legal costs. You know, to take an action for breach of terms of the lease could cost you quite a few £1,000s. So it's something people don't necessarily want to take that quick. It does.
Andy's got a question.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we had similar issues many years ago in terms of kind of noise issues. We dealt with it through environmental health at times, didn't we? In terms of people keeping a record of when the noise was happening, and then we kind of, well, took a soft approach initially, didn't we, of letters telling people, like, you know, it's not appropriate. But we did have the lease behind us, because in our lease it clearly says that there shouldn't be any loud noise music played after 11 o'clock at night. So it would be important to, you know, take on board what you just said, but look at the lease as well, but also use the other agents, like the environmental health. Plus the reason why it's Tuesday night, students don't have lectures on a Wednesday morning.
Okay, Glenn.
I was just going to say that in my experience, in quite a few cases, legal costs are not recoverable by the service charges.
Well, that's again, it depends on the terms of the lease.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And it is, I mean, you will get, if you can actually prove that there's been a breach, then if it's the actual, the leaseholder is taking the action, that there's no reason why you shouldn't be able to get an order for costs. Enforcing it then, if the owner won't actually pay, will depend on it. Can you get a charge on the property and those sort of issues, and it's not necessarily an easy fix. It may be that if you can prove that there's a breach of terms of the lease, and I'm going to talk about that a bit later about what you can do, and there's a mortgage company involved, then at that stage you may then be able to get the mortgage company, if it's service charge arrears, that they normally will pay out, because they don't want to lose their security over a property if the landlord's threatening to actually take that property back because the breach is so serious. But there's very little a mortgage company can do if the breach you're alleging is nuisance, because they can't physically do anything about that. And I have to say that I've never actually got to the stage where I've acted for a landlord that has taken a long lease property back. We've had a couple of cases where we've taken injunction proceedings and we've got cost orders because they're causing neighbour nuisance. This is in a shared ownership scheme, actually, for a housing association. And and in those cases we got injunctions, and in the end they sold the property. But it's not something you can get an immediate result for, I'm afraid. And even if you involve environmental health, they have certain cost pressures and time pressures themselves, that it's only tends to be in the more serious of cases that they'll actually do something and maybe give you sound monitoring equipment, and but it's got to be quite serious.
Howard.
Right, I'd just like to say it's not just the managing agent. The problems that we've had is with the letting agents. We've got a situation where my next door neighbour, there's been 6 or 7 different people in the block complaining to the letting agents about this guy and his behaviour. He's still there, so it doesn't matter how much you complain. them and the landlady of that property are really unwilling to lose the rent and have to find another tenant. And we can't get rid of them at all. And with regards to antisocial behaviour, I've lived in those apartments for 14 years, and we've seen it all, absolutely everything. The worst being in my own block, there was a brothel set up for 3 months. We have dogs and everything, we have all sorts. Management agents, they just think it's just okay just to send a letter out, and nothing's actually ever done.
But have you got, do you actually manage, have you got a group of directors, or have you, under the terms of your lease, got a management company in place there that you are directors of?
No, not that we're directors of, it's just an appointed one by Barrett's.
Right, and so Barrett's are the...
Barrett's were the developer.
Okay. Well, you need to, if there's still serious problems with that, start making noise with Barrett's about the scheme. And
Barrett's nothing to do with it anymore, it's controlled by Regent Management.
Right, well they're not...
Years ago.
And Regent don't like
they just
dealing with it.
They send a letter to somebody with a dog and just expect that they're going to get rid of it. But they don't. But the problem you have is, once one stays and it's there for ages, and the situation we had, it was somebody that had rented, they were only there for 6 months or whatever. But everyone else thought, okay, they're getting away with it, so now I'll have a dog. So now we've got 5 or 6.
Well, I think you'd need to look at the terms of your lease if there's anything you can do as individual leaseholders to deal, because you have got, there will be a clause in there that as a leaseholder you are entitled to what's called quiet enjoyment, and as a result of that, your landlord is in breach of the terms of your lease as a contract between you and them, if in fact you're not getting that. So you as an individual are able to start thinking about, are you going to threaten to bring proceedings against the landlord, for example, for not taking action? You'd need to check whether you've got legal expense insurance, which may be an add-on to your contents policy, which would allow you to take that step without actually paying legal costs yourself. So that's always a point I mention in any of these sessions, is check if you've got legal expense insurance. If you haven't, it's normally only an extra 10 or 20 quid as an add-on when you're looking at renewing your insurance, and it's money really well spent. I'm a solicitor, but I still always have legal expense insurance because you never know when you might actually need it. And I think it may be that you're going to have to start making threats of action, or get together as a group and say that this is not on and you need to do something about it. But I know from experience that Regent are an absolute nightmare to deal with, unfortunately.
Can I, sorry, just come in a bit, Sean. I think Andy was mentioning City Key were directors. One of the difficulties you have, just to take the pets example, before we became an RMC, the previous company had allowed anything to happen, and you inherit a situation, which we've all got, where there's pets everywhere, and it's regardless of what the lease says, it's really difficult to come in and start trying to bring someone. In fact, it's impossible.
Yeah, it is.
To do that. So you're trying to manage a bad situation, and you can't really refer to the lease. But
there will be a general nuisance clause in there.
We have it in the lease. Yeah, you can't have a pet without permission.
Yeah, but even if there's an argument that, or the leaseholder could argue, well, there's been implied permission given because I've had it for years and no one's complained and they knew about it. But that doesn't stop you relying on the nuisance clause, because it's nuisance of anything that's going on within that apartment. So that may be a tool that you're able to use, even if you're in difficulties with regards to the pets clause.
I think the other thing I wanted to mention was going back to one of David comes out, the ADRA, the Albert Dock Residents Association service agreement. We, through Engage, were encouraged by Wapping, who had a history of delivering policy documents on particular issues. The first policy document they had was water leaks. So we learnt from them, and we now have a series of policy documents which take exactly what's in the lease. And Wanda's comment about not understanding the lease, we've taken the lease, so only that section which refers to particular issues that are constant problems, like parking. So we have a traffic policy document. We have a good neighbour policy document, which deals with all of this, and we also have a pets policy as well as the water leaks policy, trying to bring some order into it. Now, those policy documents, actually people feel that they're almost like the lease, but in fact they can't be enforced.
No, they can't.
But in fact they don't need to be enforced in the majority of cases, because most people, the vast majority, when they see it written down, they will accept it and work with it. Of course, there's nothing unreasonable in the policy document. And we take people how to escalate issues if your neighbour doesn't comply with a conversation. But I've got to say that because of the austerity measures, some of these things are changing dramatically. So the environmental health team, and we have a group called the Liverpool Antisocial Behaviour Unit, Loughborough, they're so stretched now that in fact they're virtually useless for residential interventions. And relying on that would be almost impossible. We've got neighbours at City Quay who have followed that line. They didn't follow our policy document. They went to all the statutory and have got nowhere in 6 months and have had 6 months of hell. As soon as we found out, we went, visited the people, followed our own strategy, which is to ask how many other neighbours find this a problem. We gave everybody an antisocial behaviour book so they could monitor what was going on. We built up a case. We used the police as well. And we've now been able to present evidence to the owner that behaviour is unacceptable. And it's not just one person, but it's everybody else in that area. And that's actually managed. But the problem is, because this is such a nasty individual, which we all get from time to time, and it's the owner, not the tenant, who's causing the problem. We now have loud noise up to 11 o'clock at night. And at 11 o'clock it stops. But prior to 11 o'clock, it's almost unbearable.
But is there anything?
Now
But is there anything within that, with the terms of your lease, that deals with? I mean, most will have, or a lot. Certainly, my leases have for my properties a standard no noise after 11.
Yeah.
But there still should be something in there about general nuisance that you might be able to rely on, because that's causing nuisance before 11. But it depends on the wording of your leases.
Yeah. We're at the stage now where we're having to take this further for legal advice. But I think the other thing about the police it's worth noticing, two things happen with the police. One is, we've had landlords who have refused to take any criticism of their tenants until a police crime number has been served as independent proof. The police have two numbers. One is an incident number, which when you make a complaint, you get an incident number. And the other is a crime number, when a crime has been committed. And in fact, most of our landlords can't tell the difference. When they get a police number, that because an incident has been reported, that's sufficient. To get the police to come out to City Quay, this has been worked out with our crime team in our area, they say there are trigger words that will make a police response virtually sure, and that is the trigger word violence. If you suspect violence is going to break out, either from the other residents who are so distressed they're going to take the law into their own hands, or because the people are behaving in a violent manner, then the police will attend. But without that, the police will not generally attend domestics. So we've used that very carefully. We've explained it to residents when we have issues, and we found that's helped a lot. That we now get we tell residents to complain every time there's a serious noise issue or antisocial issue, if they're threatened or there's bad behaviour, and they get a number, an incident number, and we use that then in building up a case, so that if we end up going to the legal route, we've got a whole set of.
Well, that's it, because you do need evidence for the legal route, and I think, you read the popular press sometimes, and I think people just assume that you can just go ahead and get injunctions or take action with actually no assistance from anyone, and it doesn't actually work like that. So it's trying to encourage people to come forward, and a lot of people don't want to come forward, and it can cause real problems.
And these things can break out anywhere at any time in any development. I'm sure even the Albert Dock might indeed have the occasional.
But I know the
Albert
Albert Dock, I know, are really, really strict on the subletting. It's an absolute bar, and they will jump on it
Yeah.
Because I've had clients on the other side that haven't realised they've got no sublet clause, and
Yeah.
you know there's just no way around it. They can't do it, and it's quite clear in that lease, which doesn't help if you're a buy-to-let landlord and you've bought your property not realising that's the case. But then you
Do you want
sue
to
your
take
sister.
us through? There's a few levels here that.
Yeah, there's obviously persuasion, which Jerry has talked about. Mediation is something that, as solicitors, we're using more and more as an alternative to a court process. There's some informal mediation offerings. Certainly I come across it a lot from doing work for housing associations, that there's informal mediation services that you can actually call upon. And there's the more formal route, which is actually getting a proper mediator appointed to deal between the parties, which involves a cost. I should imagine if you're involved in any sort of mediation at all for neighbour nuisance issues, it would be an informal, or you might have an independent third party, for example Jerry, trying to get involved. And sometimes they have really, really good results. The court process, you could be looking at injunction proceedings to stop the behaviour, an injunction to force them to get rid of the dog if they have no permission for the dog, for example, if you want to take that sort of hard line on it. But increasingly, more and more litigational disputes are dealt with by, it was called the Leasehold Valuation Tribunal. It changed its name last July to the, doesn't trip easily off the tongue, First Tier Tribunal Property Chamber. But this is something, I think, certainly I still call it the LVT, but it's more or less the same, and it deals with a number of disputes, and we'll talk about that probably after coffee. But the tribunal will deal with anything from disputes over service charge, has someone consulted under Section 20, or the administration charges that you might be charged by your landlord for getting permission for subletting reasonable. They look at those sort of issues. They look at disputes of whether you've carried out your right to manage process correctly, and Regent are someone that will actually always dispute a right to manage. And there's been a number of reported decisions when they've done that, and they cause real problems when most landlords will actually just walk away.
What's worse about that, they use our money from the sinking fund to do that. So they're fighting, we want to get rid of them, and they're using our money to fight us in court. It's just ridiculous. But this new body, there is a key difference with that new body, and it's the £500 limitation of costs that has changed now. If you go down that route now,
it's only if it's vexatious. The court cost, or the issue, what used to happen under the LVT was that you could, if the person who had brought the claim was actually a vexatious litigant, then there could be a cost order made against them up to £500. The rules about them being vexatious are still the same, and it's really, really difficult to prove that someone's been a vexatious litigant. Then the cost order is not limited to £500, it's unlimited now. But you still can't get a general cost order against you as an individual unless you've been proved by the LVT or the tribunal to have been completely outrageous in the way that you've behaved about something.
Not just in that case, I know a recent case where it was said they took a 20C application out, and they were under the impression they would only have to pay a maximum of £500. They didn't. They both had to pay thousands of pounds.
Well, that's not the
forced them to.
That's not the way that the rules actually work.
Well, in that case, I mean, it hasn't ended.
Can I just come in? We will continue that discussion, but under the slide on LVTs, we'll come to, because it's a very important question that Howard's raising, and you've got experience in this area, so
yeah.
I just want to transfer that to the